Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our SayoStudio Science podcast. So we are here talking to you today about science, about communication, about visuals, and we're excited to have you. And after this brief intro, we have an exciting guest with us today, an NIH communications specialist. And we just wanted to remind you that we are so happy to have all of you listeners here today, but we also have this on YouTube. So sometimes we share a lot of visuals and graphics that we do there as well. So be sure to check that out. And Claire, do you want to run us through a few of the projects that we're working on now before we talk to our guest?
Yeah, so we only have a couple new projects. We've kind of done this intro a couple times now where we like to go through what we have going on behind the scenes because we think it's kind of an exciting peek into just what it looks like to be science illustrators, which we think is very exciting. So we've gone through a handful, and those are all in progress, wrapping up, and going through revisions, and some of it, which is actually interesting because it comes to the point that, you know, a lot of the work we do has a long life as far as before it's wrapped up and off to the client with the final files sent. And yeah, so the new ones we have going right now are a journal cover for the can I say the journal name?
Yeah, PNAS. Yeah.
So a journal cover for PNAS. That's been an exciting challenge. It's it's cell biology, and it's very, very data heavy, and it is conceptual, but it isn't conceptual. So it's been a fun challenge. And so that's in progress, which is exciting. We're hoping we can send in a variety to PNAS, so we can increase those chances of them getting selected for that cover art. And then apart from that, we have a new pitch deck design project. And Nicole, you've been working on that one, and I'll let you speak to that more, but just briefly, that's been a really fun, exciting challenge. Trying to show kind of a really so it's their principal image describing, you know, what they're trying to get investing for. And it's complex, and we really want, you know, the viewers, the investors, to see it and kind of get why their approach is unique and makes a lot more sense than the technology, the biotechnology that's been out there prior.
Yeah, I think that's a great description. And unfortunately, I don't know if there's too much more than that we can say because we're under an NDA for their technology. So I'm nervous to even kind of say what realm it's in, but it has been a really fun puzzle. And I wish that we could show it. So hopefully when they go public with it all, we can, because it's been a really interesting puzzle of trying to simplify. And I think that's what's hard a lot of times when we are working with new clients. And this one, it works out well because they're people that we've worked with before when they were leading other companies. Yeah. But trying to explain that sometimes the simplest graphics are actually the hardest to try to really distill down an idea. And I can't tell you how long it took me of like playing with different visual metaphors. We're going back to the visual metaphors discussion again, to try to figure out, okay, you know, is this something that because I have it in my head, it makes sense to me, or is it actually legible and readable and makes sense to others? So yeah, it's been fun though. It's fun. And the nice thing about this one is that it's a suite of graphics and design, and it's because they really want the entire pitch deck to match their brand and have that same sort of visual language throughout. So it's always fun when we get to work on a more larger project like that, so that we can really make everything work together.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I guess my only addition to that was, like you mentioned, simplifying these simple graphics can be the most difficult when communicating something that's complex. And then for biotech, it's kind of the same thing when it comes to style. Like nowadays, kind of a 3D, really complex style is really popular. But in some cases, it's nice to avoid that, and also kind of in an attempt to set you apart, because that is so popular right now. And so, like, you know, trying to make kind of the fun and new 2D styles that are out and work for a company like this is also an exciting challenge that I think you did a really good job at, Nicole.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, you and I have been talking a lot about how fun some of the really simple line drawing can be. So actually, maybe that's something that we can show off to our viewers if you all check out the YouTube channel, some of the fun line drawings that we've been having of different cells and cell types and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, it actually led us to kind of an exciting new internal project that we thought we might do. So I think that's always fun too, like a byproduct of some of these projects that are challenging and inspiring at the same time, is we're like, oh, we have to do this on our own time because this is really cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And now the challenge is carving out time for that. We will do it.
Always the challenge is finding the time.
So. All right. Well, I think that we can get ready to have our guest on. And thank you again for all of you joining us today. And stay tuned as we bring her on in just a moment.
All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SayoStudio Science podcast. We are very excited to introduce our guest today. This is Ashley Hackett. She is a former communications specialist at the NIH Office of AIDS Research. Prior to that, she was at NIH, the Office of Data Science Strategy, where she was the communications lead and science writer. Prior to being at NIH, she worked as an investigative reporter in the DC area, and she is now doing freelance writing. Ashley, we're super excited to kind of delve into your journey and talk more about all the craziness that's happening today. Before doing that, Nicole and I kind of, just intro into what we do and how that intercepts with what you do as a writer. Nicole, do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I would love to. So I started out many, many years ago as like a niche. I am a science illustrator. And I feel like over my 2 decades of work, it's become broader and become more of this idea of science communication. And before, I feel like science writing and science illustration, and we're kind of siloed. And I feel like the two have come together a lot more. And I guess before, I didn't even think of myself as a science communicator. Like I thought of it as a very separate thing. So Ashley, I'd love to hear your thoughts on science communication kind of in general, and how you as a writer fit in, and with the predominance of sharing information on social media, and how because of that, I think it's kind of brought the writing and the visual worlds together a bit more.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. Super excited to chat with you about, as you said, the craziness that's been going on with the federal science I mean, just federal landscape in general in the
Mhm.
last few months. But I think in terms of what science communication means to me, I, as you mentioned, was a journalist before I started doing communications at NIH. And so I've always sort of viewed my work as a type of translation, if that makes sense. So taking, even when I was a journalist or a political journalist, taking really complex ideas and sort of consolidating them and explaining them in a way that the general public can understand. And that's not to say that the general public is not smart. That's not what it is at all. But I am saying that a lot of times scientists, and you guys can probably attest to this from your science communication background, but a lot of times people who are experts in their field are so niche in understanding like the complex biology of something, or in my work at the Office of AIDS Research, the complexities of different vaccine trials and even like the proteins that make up whatever these scientists are working on. And so it takes a specialized skill set to see that information, condense it, and try to explain it in a way that makes sense for anyone to understand.
Mhm.
So that was my role, I felt, as a journalist and trying to get important information out to the public. And I viewed my role at NIH in a similar way of just trying to get the essential information out to the public.
I think that is a great description. It's something Claire and I have actually talked about before, because Claire has done some language translation. And so we've talked about the similarities with what we do. And a lot of times, we ask the scientists and researchers that we work with to give us their actual manuscripts, their journal articles. And it's not because we can necessarily understand everything that's in there, but even just having that as a place where we can find the keywords that they use, look up those keywords, figure out what they mean. And so it really is about translation, whether or not you're using more common English language to describe that, or using visuals. So I'm so
And
curious. Did you start? Sorry, Claire, did you have a question?
I was just going to add the other piece
Uh-huh.
of that is just being kind of like the non-biased like entity in dispersing the information. Like you're so, like you said, specialized and in your own world of, what these vaccines are doing, what proteins we're studying. And then it just takes kind of a step back and maybe a different person who's not totally wrapped up in all of those details to share it.
Definitely. You have to
Yeah.
sort of straddle the worlds of what's going on in the public and what's going on in the laboratory, for example.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
funny anecdote I have of that experience is a lot of the scientists at NIH that I worked with had young kids, or kids maybe like high school age at the max. And so I would ask them, how would you explain to your 8-year-old how this HIV vaccine trial works? And then they would have to think about it, and they'd be like, oh, well, they ask me what I do all the time, but I don't really know how to tell them. And so we have to sort of walk through it that way. And honestly, if they get it to the point where they think an 8-year-old can understand it, then probably a high school graduate can understand it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of back and forth translational work like that.
Yeah. An 8-year-old is probably a great standard to try to get to. And that sounds like it sounds like you're bringing it down to such a basic level. But if you if you haven't talked to an 8-year-old lately, like, they ask the most incredible questions, and they're actually really good about pointing out what's not making sense and what's so Ashley, what I wanted to ask you is, do you have a science background? Did you start out in the science world?
No, I don't at all, actually.
That's so amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh.
I do have a master's degree, but it is in journalism.
Mhm.
So, but it was a Master of Science in journalism. So I have that little MS behind my name, which I think maybe is one of the reasons I got hired in the first place.
I love it.
Like, oh, MS, she has to have a science background.
Yeah.
No, but I think, that actually helps me in some ways, because if you go into a science communications role without actually understanding all of the mechanisms that are at play, it actually makes it a little bit easier, because I actually have to get people to explain to me step by step how things work, which I think helps actually.
Mm-hmm.
Is,
Yeah.
there's a lot of complicated things that are happening in all types of science, but I have sort of the understanding of what people in the real world will know without a science background. So I think it helped actually.
Did you purposefully look for did you, as you were doing your investigative reporting, did you find that you're really enjoying reporting on these sorts of more technical science subjects, or is it something that you kind of slid into and realized that you really enjoyed doing? Like,
That's a good question. My last full-time role in journalism was as a Washington correspondent. And so
mhm.
I was actually working for a Minnesota paper, which happens to be where I grew up, which was really cool. So I was working with people in the Minnesota delegation. So like Amy Klobuchar, Tina Smith, those are the bigger names, I guess.
Mhm.
And a lot of their legislation oftentimes had to do with science. And Tina Smith was a big supporter of HIV and AIDS funding. And so I ended up doing a story with her just about a bill that she was supporting that really honed in on HIV and, the reasons why people need medication, et cetera, et cetera. And so the science part of that was interesting, but I think to me, I was more focused on the people aspect. And
Mm,
so I guess working as a political correspondent, that was kind of what I had to do with any subject, no matter if it was science or related to the environment or energy or
mm,
immigration.
mm,
It was always this sort of top level reading a bill language and then trying to figure out how that was going to affect the general
cool.
public. So to me, I sort of saw science as a great place to go from journalism. And I won't get into all the reasons. I mean, journalism is a great career, but there was just things that there were things that weren't working for me. So I really looked to places like NIH and NSF and some other federal agencies just because I was in the DC area. And that is, one of the main employers of people here.
Mm,
And so I knew that because I had experience taking really sort of broad and complicated topics and relating it to the public that I would be able to do that for health communications. So NIH was a great fit for that and I loved my role there. I still love NIH. Um
yeah.
but but yeah, so it wasn't necessarily scientific reporting that got me there. It was just sort of
Mm,
the process of relating complicated subjects to the public.
That is I think that's a great reminder that we often try to put science like aside, I think. And perhaps that's something that like we as a general larger science communication field has failed at, is like really helping people understand the human impact, because it touches every single part of our life. And
mhm,
I'm afraid that that's why some of these cuts have been allowed to happen and move forward. I
mhm,
mean, hopefully a lot of them are held up in the courts and they won't all go through, but the damage is already done in so many ways. And this is me getting on my soapbox, but I never thought we'd be in this place. Like in my mind, science, supporting science, funding science is not political. Like
mhm.
the the fact that, yeah, we are in this place is just, it's so short-sighted. So anyway, Ashley, I would love to hear you talk about your experience. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many places we could go with this, as far as what we can do better as science communicators to try to get this across. But then also, we have you on today so you can tell us more about all the incredible things that NIH has done and
Mhm.
what programs are stalled, at risk, and cut. So
Yeah. Oof. It's a lot.
yeah.
It's a lot and it's sad. I think before I get into all the things happening currently, I want to sort of jump off on a point that you made there about how, science is not political and maybe we put it off to the side and it's not the top of mind for everyone. But I think that the impact of science is often things that are not seen, and that's just especially with health related research, because we don't hear about people dying of polio all the time and no one's thinking about polio really, um,
Mhm.
and that's because there are tons of historical research that's been done in order to make sure that it's not a problem. we aren't hearing of people dying from bacteria in drinking water, because it's not happening because there's federal funding that's ensuring that it doesn't happen. So I think like the reason that people maybe don't think about science all the time is because they don't have to, because there are all these processes that are already in place that are federally funded that are protecting people, and we just don't know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is something that I think is really important in science communication. I think, you know, we have this struggle between not wanting to be alarmist but wanting people to understand what's really happening. And so I think I don't know how to fix that. I'm just one person, but that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I know that with all of the research that's being cut, the effects might not be truly seen for a couple of years, because all of these, you know, all the funding is going to sort of grind everything to a stop slowly.
That's what really scares me.
Yeah. And so, for example, if I don't know, this is highly hypothetical. I don't want people to freak out, but I'm just saying, you know, hypothetically, if one of the projects that funds, you know, bacteria reduction in drinking water stops, then people could die from that, right? Like there could be a lot of issues that come from that. And then it's going to be this huge deal like, oh no, the NIH failed us, or the FDA failed us, when really it's because of funding that was cut maybe years prior. So those are the things that keep me up at night.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite dire, and I'm glad that we're here talking about it today.
It's funny just that, you know, the fear of being quote unquote alarmist. It's so interesting how, yeah, just how much that falls onto the realm of science and why, really. You know, I think a degree of alarm and concern is necessary to, you know, like we're saying, pay attention and, you know why we have the privileges we have today because of the work that's been done in the past. So yeah, it's just interesting that kind of burden of not being an alarmist gets placed in our, you know, in the world of science. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know why.
I think a lot of it, I mean, science is so incremental. As a scientist, I think you're really taught to not, you know, like, okay, this one research result, this thing that I've been working on for years, that I'm publishing this paper on, is one small step toward finding a better therapy for this specific cancer. And so, you know, I think you're taught, like, I don't want to say that this is going to cure cancer. I don't want to say that this is going to be the end all answer to finding a new antibacterial. And so I think, I mean, it's an important caution, but I think that's also why it's hard to say absolute things. And then of course, you know, there's always, that's part of research, right? Like things that we thought were true, we do more research and we realize that, oh, well, you know, now we need to shift our understanding, and the public who isn't seeing all of this details of what's getting done is understandably like, wait a second, you said that this was right, but now you're saying this is right. I don't know. I don't know if that plays into all of it.
Yeah, and can look at science that's been disproven and still move forward and say this is why it's been disproven. There's a reason we had to go this path, this way to come to our ultimate answer. But yeah, that's tough in sharing science in general, because when are we ever at the true, you know, the end all? Never, maybe. No.
But Ashley, you're right. There are many things that we enjoy today that are definitely true facts that are because of all the hard work that people did decades ago. So
I don't know your question, but I went off on my tangent, so I couldn't remember what it was, but please keep going.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was just kind of guiding us into, are we ready to start talking about some of the programs at specifically at NIH where you've been working to communicate their importance have been stalled, cut.
And your experience personally in the recent weeks, months.
Sure.
Yeah.
So maybe I can start with my personal experience, and then we can go into some of the broader items that were cut. So as we mentioned at the beginning, I am a former communications specialist at the NIH Office of AIDS Research. At the time that we're recording this podcast, that is official as of like 4 days ago, I think. But it all sort of started back in February, this whole crazy process. So after the inauguration, my team at the Office of AIDS Research was relatively worried about what was going to happen to our programming, partially because there was a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that was a bad thing in the government, which to me is, I think that there's a reason why they always say DEI, so they don't have to say the actual words diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they don't really sound that bad when you say them out loud, right? At least to me. So we were worried because the nature of HIV and AIDS research is that, it sort of started out as a stereotypically gay, plague, essentially, in the 1980s. So a lot of the people that we serve are, gay men, bisexual men, trans women, but also, HIV and AIDS has become a problem for essentially everyone. It does not the virus does not discriminate based off of what your gender or sexual identity is. But because, people who are in historically minoritized populations, who are in, disadvantaged areas of the country, even people with less access to free or subsidized healthcare, are often the people that are more affected by, everything, including sexually transmitted infections like HIV. So a lot of our content on our website, for example, talks about LGBTQ people, it talks about women, it talks about gender, it talks about sex. And, these are all things that are, not inflammatory because they're factual, right? A sexually transmitted infection is something that needs to be said out loud. And so we were worried that a lot of these buzzwords that the administration was starting to come up with, like gender or transgender or gay or anything like that, we were worried that they were going to be flagged for us and that our research was going to be canceled, or that, we didn't really know what was going to happen. So we were sort of waiting out, for information to come down the pipe to us. And there was actually one day that I will absolutely never forget, probably for the rest of my life, when our entire office was in person at the Rockville office in Maryland, and we were having our annual sort of planning meeting, strategic planning for what the rest of 2025 was going to look like. So our whole office was there. We were usually hybrid, so it was sort of like half and half. People would be there or be not, but we were all together in this conference room there. And at the end of the day, our director went up to the front of the room and she told us that she had just gotten messaging come down from HHS telling us that these specific words were going to need to be scrubbed from our website by 5 p.m. that day. And this was at like 3 p.m.
By 5 p.m. Oh my gosh.
We were like, okay. And, I can't remember the full list of words now, but it was things like diversity, racial identity. There were things like, I'm trying to remember.
Sorry to interrupt, but was this the list that included women as like a word that is not?
Yeah, it's that list that I think has been circulated quite a bit. So we were all kind of like, whoa, this is real. This is a directive from HHS. So we all kind of had to scramble and identify where these words were being said. Maybe if we could like change them to something else. And these are things like health inequities, right? Like it was wild. That same day, we also got notification that people at the Office of SGMRO, Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office. So people at the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office were put on administrative leave with no like notification of why. They just lost access to their computers and everything. And we were like, okay, so they were a buzzword office. I guess that makes sense. Obviously concerning. And then sort of in the next few days, while all this stuff was weighing very heavy on us as an office, we were all hearing it at once. We were just like, oh my God, what is going to happen? The next few days, we started learning that government-wide probationary employees were going to be cut. And that was me. And so for people who are not familiar, probationary sort of has a negative connotation, but in the federal government, you are a probationary employee for the first year that you're working there. And the only thing that means is that you can be more easily fired for performance reasons or for like HR reasons. Like, I don't know, let's say you got in a physical fight with somebody. Obviously, that doesn't really happen. But if you did, it would be easier for you to be fired because once you reach that 1 year mark, federal employees are sort of on tenure. So it's, you have to build up a stronger case to fire someone for performance reasons. I had been a federal employee for 1.5 years, but because I was hired under a disability clause, my probationary period was 2 years, which I was told at the time. I was recommended by one of my supervisors who had hired me from contractor to Fed. I was told, she's like, I know you have like XYZ going on. You should try to get this disability notification on your account so that you're protected in case something happens. So I was like, okay, great. I don't care if I have a longer probationary period. I've never had any performance issues, whatever. But obviously that came to get me in the end. So I was 1.5 years into my federal time. And then on Valentine's Day, actually, it was just a great day. We learned that there was, a list of all the federal employees at NIH and that they were going to be cut that day. So we were sort of waiting. Yeah, I know. I was like, the timing is crazy. So there was 4 of us in my office. 3 of us were on the same team, which was tough. The communications and policy team. And we sort of all got this notification that it was coming. And I ended up getting my official termination email the next day. And then about an hour after I read the email, I lost all access to my account. So it was pretty sudden. It was really sad. And the worst part was that they said that it was the same letter to every employee that got this at NIH. And they said that we all were fired for performance reasons, which was funny because I had just gotten, we have like this rating scale for your annual review. 5 is like you need a promotion, 4 is outstanding, whatever. So I got a 4 out of 5 on that scale. So I was like, oh yeah, my performance was so bad that you had to fire me. That's so funny. So if I sound a little bit bitter about that, it's because I still am. It's tough when you get fired for a reason that doesn't exist, right? And that was just given to every single probationary employee at NIH. So that happened. And then, of course, the courts got involved. So there were multiple lawsuits filed after that occurred because all of these people were fired illegally, essentially. And the lawsuits were going and going and going until one happened. I think this past Thursday or something like that, where there was some ruling that essentially allowed us to be fired again. So and I'll stop in a second, but I think one point here was that this was enacted by DOGE. If someone has not heard what DOGE is, Department of Government Efficiency, it's Trump and Elon Musk's baby. Mm-hmm. They're trying to like root out corruption in the federal government, etc. But I'll just say that from February 15th to May 8th, I was being paid my full salary, benefits, everything to do nothing. I was at home. I went on vacation, but I was still, I was obviously very sad to not have my job, but I was like, what else am I supposed to do, So they were paying, and this is tens of thousands of people they were paying for several months to sit there and not do anything. So I don't know where the government efficiency is in that, but that was the situation. So I'll pause. That was
I was just going to say, I mean, if we're talking about efficiency, the fact that everybody got these notices, and you said it was like next day or that day that you were expected to leave, you couldn't get access to your computer. Is that right? I mean, how is that efficient that this information can't be like, you can't make sure that the information is like saved and prepped for the next person who's going to come on? I mean, clearly there's no plan for the next person. I mean,
Oh no, I think the idea was that anyone who lost their job, that position just wouldn't exist anymore. So,
Yeah.
and
And in the name of efficiency, if that's the case, that it's like this no longer needs, like your job no longer needs to exist, it's unimportant, whatever, why is that not stated versus like your performance, which was just a blatant lie?
yeah. I would have
Yeah.
loved if they would have gone and done a long audit of the federal government. And I'm sure, listen, I'm sure there's waste out there. There has to, like, there's no way there's not. But the way you find that is by having people go in and audit the federal government in every capacity. And then, you're sort of taking a scalpel to the areas that shouldn't be there instead of taking like a chainsaw and just lopping off everyone who was still in their probationary period. And some of these people were folks who had actually just switched offices. So every time you get a different job and you switch offices at NIH, you're on a new probationary period. So there are people who were there for 20 something years. That it wasn't just all new folks either.
yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
real
I know
shame.
at NSF there were people that were like heads of their directorate that were cut.
Yeah.
Like, it's just,
Oh yeah, actually our office director at the Office of AIDS Research, it was a long hiring process and she had started in October. So she was actually in the hiring process longer than she was in the job. She was first fired as a probationary employee and then they brought her back somehow. I think just because she was a director. So I don't know how that works. I'm not there anymore, but yeah, it was
so the
both.
fact that you were on paper fired for your performance, does that mean that does that allow them to not give you like any sorts of like benefits or things that they're supposed to, or unemployment? Does that impact other?
That's a good question. I have not yet applied for unemployment because
I'm sorry, I should have asked.
waiting. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sort of waiting for the dust to settle on that.
Yeah.
And I think I might actually have a paid opportunity like already. So I think I will probably not have to apply for unemployment. But yeah, you have to be fired. I mean, if you're fired for a cause that is your fault, at least in Maryland for the unemployment office, that
Mhm.
makes it a lot harder to actually get
Yeah.
the benefits. And the letter that I got in the mail this weekend that refired me, I wish I had it in front of me because it was pretty funny how they worded it. They said the court case that there was a judge that ruled that the federal government had to say that we weren't fired for performance reasons. And so they're like, you were not fired for performance reasons. However, we disagree with this and will be appealing this in court. So
Wow.
yeah, I can send you guys a copy of it later. But so I guess technically now they're saying I wasn't fired for performance reasons with the caveat that they don't think that's true.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to share that.
Course.
I think that there's still a surprising amount of people out there who really don't realize how many really good people we've lost. Like, they really believe that this is about efficiency, and so hearing your story is very valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to spread the word as much as possible.
Yeah. All right. So, how many is your department, the office that you're in, is it functional? Are there enough people left there? Is what's happening with the rest of your programs that you are helping to support?
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly how many people are at our office, but they are still, as of right now, functioning. Our communications and policy team is certainly suffering because that was a lot of the probationary folks that we lost. But a lot of people had been there for a really long time. My former colleagues, we all loved working there. I loved my job. So there was not a lot of turnover there. So a lot of people had been there for an established, a long career. So to my knowledge, things are still moving along. However, I will say that there has been a lot of grant money that has already been discontinued in the federal government. And most of this, at least initially, was stopping grants that had those DEI buzzwords in them, like gender, women, right? Things like that. So although mechanistically the office is still functioning, there has already been a lot of research that's been lost.
And I think you
Yeah.
I think you was that kind of the list you had in mind of like kind of some of those grants that were I'm curious.
If we cut this minute out of me trying to find what I was looking for, we can find it. I have a number, just 1.8 billion in NIH funding overall that's been cut so far. This came out of CNN yesterday. But I know there was a list there. Hold on.
Oh, I forgot. There is an Airtable that somebody's keeping of all of the different grants for both NIH and NSF that have been lost.
Let's see. There's one that's like, oh, I found it. It's really long. But I can just pick out a couple on this list. So there's an estimate coming out of the Senate Help Committee, which is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And it was released last week. It says that, let's see, targeted grant terminations have affected more than 1.8 billion in NIH funding. So that's not breaking down exactly what's been cut, but 1.8 billion in the funding cut that helps these that helps these research projects happen is really, it's very dire. Yeah, so there's another statistic here, and this is reported by CNN yesterday, and it's coming off of the Help Committee's release that says that federal funding to support cancer research was cut 31% from January through March compared with the same time frame last year. So, of course, there are things like HIV and AIDS to me seems more obvious because of the DEI buzzwords that our office used to explain our research. But a 31% cut to a 31% cut to cancer research funding is just, I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. It's like, these things aren't really political, and I struggle to think of how cancer research is a political ploy or some sort of efficiency issue. I would say that cancer touches everyone. I don't know anyone that's not been touched by cancer, either themselves or a family member or friend. So that in itself is very upsetting. I can read off a couple of other grants that have since been canceled. One of them is a grant for about $650,000 for immunization and vaccines for children. And that is in Indiana, for example. So there's a lot of states that have lost this funding as well. We also have a grant that was about $127,000 for surveillance and response to avian and pandemic influenza. So that's things like bird flu and other smaller pandemics that could, really affect our population. So to me, looking at these grants, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of controversial things happening in them, but they've still been targeted by this administration. So it's pretty sad.
Ashley, I have a really dopey question that I should know. So I know that CDC's been decimated. NIH and CDC.
Two separate entities. Yeah.
So in addition to the NIH cuts for the bird flu that you just talked about, like CDC has also had a ton of cuts, correct? Okay.
Yeah. And I would say for folks unfamiliar, the biggest difference between NIH and CDC is NIH imagine funding for people in a lab that are, working with test tubes and stuff like that. CDC is the implementation of this research. So CDC is, they're doing a lot of the pandemic tracking. They tracked COVID cases around the country when, COVID was first starting and continuing on. So there are a lot of different parts of, medical and scientific research that are being hit for both of these agencies.
And I guess
And
that's
then
another part of the problem is in addition to all the funding cuts, all of the people that are losing their positions, all the information that you said that you had to edit on the website, like it's not just editing stuff. They're taking like wholesale data sets off these websites. So like if you, the public, want to educate yourself about these numbers, like it's gone. I know there's a lot of people out there who are working to save that information, but
that's where I was going to, like what you had to scrub just because of buzzwords, that day where you had 2 hours, like what do you know, like what was that? And then now in your department, so in the AIDS research, but then on a broader level, NIH in general, what does that look like?
I mean, I don't even know if I could answer that because it's been so widespread. It's impossible to keep track of all of the websites that have been edited or changed or taken down completely. I think that a lot of pages came down really quickly after that order that I was talking about. I think it was January 22nd, maybe that came down. A lot of things came down because I think that different teams and different agencies were really scared that they were going to be targeted. So they just took the pages down completely to be able to edit them and figure out what they could put back up. So some things did come back up. And I want to emphasize that there's a difference between the orders that people at these health agencies are getting and the people themselves that are working there, right? Because it was devastating for, I think, pretty much everyone, all of these things that were being targeted, and people were being really careful because they didn't want to, bring more attention to their work. So there were a lot of data sets that were lost. For us in particular, the Office of AIDS Research manages the federal clinical guidelines that but the guidelines that are used by doctors and clinicians when treating people with HIV. Not every doctor in the country is educated on every single disease out there. And so it's important to have like standardized procedures for things like HIV. So there was one part of that that dealt with HPV and anal cancer that was more prevalent in people with HIV. Especially for, the standardized, like men who have sex with men populations, transgender women. And so because that section of the clinical guidelines had, a lot of mentions of sex and anal cancer and trans and gay, all of that, we had to scrub that pretty thoroughly, which was just it was really hard for me because that was something that I had specifically written to make sure that the plain language was available so that doctors maybe not well versed in working with trans populations would be able to have, dialogue that they could have with people that would just make the experience much easier for folks. And that was something that we had to significantly edit. So for me personally, that was extremely hard, just because I had been directly involved with it. But there's countless stories like this across NIH and CDC and all the other agencies.
And Nicole, you mentioned kind of a spreadsheet being put together, and I think there's been a variety of like public efforts to salvage and save some of this information. But like you said, Ashley, I don't think it's entirely possible to capture it all, to save it all for when it can be publicly available again.
Yeah, we'll try to put links to some of the most useful ones that we have in the description of our YouTube post. But if you all have other resources that are helpful, we'd love to have them in the comments if you want to leave them. Ashley, we've taken up a ton of your time. Thank you so much. I guess one thing, if you could speak to before we go, since I've done a lot of work with NSF over the years, a lot of the basic research they fund that we've already talked about, like it has long-term benefits, right? I mean, that's why we're able to do this Zoom meeting and, use our phones, on and on and on. So the long-term ramifications of cutting funding to science and lack of support, they're going to be huge. But there's also a lot of real life impacts right now. And I know that one of the programs that your office that supported, funded, is seeing those impacts right now in Africa. I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that.
So I think you're talking about PEPFAR, which is an organization that was canceled really quickly after the administration change. And PEPFAR is responsible for the rollout of antiretroviral therapy, or ART, to different countries in primarily Africa and Southeast Asia. And so what ART is the medicine that allows someone with HIV to tamp down the immune response and essentially be undetectable and untransmittable. So ART allows people with HIV to live, pretty normal lives and not be, affected by the virus in the ways that people who are not on medication are. So yeah, PEPFAR had a lot of different programs in Africa and Southeast Asia that provided ART to people, and a lot of the people who received this treatment were children, because a significant problem that still exists in parts of Africa and Southeast Asia is that children are born with HIV because it's perinatally transmitted by their mother when they're giving birth. And it means that a lot more people will be born with HIV and will not receive the medication that they need, which will lead to more deaths. It will lead to a more widespread virus in these areas. And I think that the cancellation of funding there is just, it's really sad to see. It was a great program. It really did not cost that much money in the terms of the federal budget. So yeah, that's really, really hard to talk about and to know that that's happening.
I have in my notes here that the program has been credited with preventing an estimated 26 million AIDS-related deaths since its inception. So, and that's something that I'm sure you have better thought out ideas on this, but I feel like it's something that's important to point out, is that with infectious disease, if you are taking the stance that I want to protect the people in my country, in my local community, therefore it's not important to help people in other countries, in places like Africa. Like, we live in a global community, and an increase in infectious disease in other places is going to impact us. I think it's sad that needs to be pointed out, but
yeah, you saw, COVID did not take very long to spread into a global pandemic. It started in one small community, and people travel, like people get on planes and trains and everything all the time. And so, yeah, it's impossible to ignore that a disease outbreak in one country is just steps away from America. So you're completely right with that, Nicole.
Okay, so okay. I so appreciate your time, Ashley. I guess as far as positive things, I mean, you are working really hard to get this information out there. I know that Claire found you on social media. You've been fantastic at using that as a platform to get more information out. Do you have other thoughts on what people can do if they are not happy about, seeing science defunded and unsupported, and health issues not being addressed anymore?
And just, if it can, as much as I know we've talked so long, but your post that went viral, and what's involved with that, like the attention you get, both positive and negative, the risk there for the better good, and just for getting your story out, which is so important. Yeah,
it's been a little bit of a crazy ride, I think. Soon after I was originally fired and then brought back and whatever, soon after that happened, I was sort of thinking about, what can I do to help in any way? Because it was just sort of overnight. I didn't have work in the morning, right, which sort of gave me a huge amount of fulfillment every day. And so from my background as a journalist, someone who's been very much like, I was a lot more in the public sphere when I was a journalist. And I wasn't even that big of a reporter. Like my reputation was not that big. But just knowing the ins and outs of social media and how when the world's eyes are on one situation, that's the time that you have to do something if you want to something to go viral, if you know, or if you want attention to be brought to a subject. So I knew that everyone's eyes were on America after the inauguration, and I knew that there was a lot of things being said about federal employees. I also knew that I probably was not going to be able to keep my job regardless of what happened. And just the fact that I was being forced to sort of erase LGBTQ people from the public record as one of the last things I did as my job, and like being queer myself, I was like, I don't know if I can go back to that environment, even though I love my colleagues. So I decided to start posting about what was happening at NIH. And I mean, like you mentioned, Claire, it kind of took off, and I was contacted by a good amount of politicians and media outlets and all of that. So I was able to sort of take the reins of that situation, give myself some power back to talk about what was happening and spread the word. So that was sort of my way of like giving back, I guess, or just making sure that the public was informed about what was going on, because I know that, you know, news outlets were reporting on it, but oftentimes people, especially younger people, get their news from TikTok. So I was like, let me just meet people where they're at. So that's what I did. I also protested in Congress a couple of times, not like on the public record, but a lot of fired federal employees gathered and showed up at senators' offices and asked them what they were going to do about the situation. So that I think was effective for some, not for others, just depending on where they were at in the political spectrum. But that was a good way to sort of do something, right? And Nicole, you asked what people can do if this is really upsetting, if they believe in science and they want funding to come back. I think that as much as people harp on calling your representatives, it is effective. You know, my husband used to work in the Senate in some capacity and would get notifications if people's phone lines were filling up, and like there would be a lot of chatter from representatives and people in Congress if, you know, there was one topic that their constituents were calling about nonstop. And that happened a lot, you know, when the first big firing of all the federal employees happened. So I think that as much as you can, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, like there's this really great app called 5 Calls, I believe, and it gives you a script for issues that you care about, and you can call your representatives. I've done it before. Excuse me. Sometimes you get a person online that you can talk to. Sometimes you leave a message, but I think that's very effective. And honestly, the other big thing I would say is just try to keep yourself educated about what's going on, because I think that there are so many things in this administration that are making the news. And a lot of it is distraction techniques, honestly, to sort of distract from what really matters. So as much as you can, try to follow people on social media who are talking about, you know, what's going on in the federal government or any issue that you care about. And also, you know, find reporters that you trust in the news as well, that report on things that you care about. I used to be a reporter. I'm not anymore. So I don't have the power of a news organization behind me, which is why I took to social media. But I think it unfortunately is on us to keep ourselves educated about what's going on.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And I love the, we're always talking about the mistrust in journalism now, unfortunately. And I love the suggestion of, you know, finding the ones that you know, trust and that you can follow. And and it's also really heartening to hear the experience that it matters if you call your congressman and senators. So
and
I think they're just calling into a black box, but they do have to actually, like, staffers do have to record like how many people called about a certain topic. So if anything, numbers are there when you're contacting folks. Mhm.
And that resource you provided, yeah, like nowadays there's so many platforms that help you with that the barrier of making a contact. Like, is it a phone call, is it an email, and they'll provide scripts for you, and you can kind of just go through the steps, 1 2 3, like I've emailed, I've called, so we'll definitely provide the link of the one you mentioned. What was that called?
5 calls, but
5 calls.
look that up. Make sure I'm not making that up. I think that's what it's called, though.
And there's a couple I have in my inbox that are
Mhm.
really useful, and those might be tied to kind of the topics that I know I'm more passionate about. But yeah, we'll provide those resources in our description, just to get you guys all thinking on how to make that easier. Getting a hold of your representatives and voicing your opinions.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for all of your time and this inside look at what's happening. We really appreciate it. And it makes us feel like we're doing our small part to try to get the information
Yeah,
out
I
there.
mean, you are. This is getting the information out.
Yeah.
It's important, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate what you're doing. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, and to all of our listeners, as you may have heard, we have a lot of different types of content that we've been playing with. So we're so happy to have our guest Ashley, and we'd love to hear it if you enjoyed listening to this interview. And yeah, let us know in the comments. So thank you.